What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be reviewing the games of the Crazyhouse World Championship candidates match between international master opperwezen and another titled player, also from Holland, VariantsOnly. So let's get right into it. Game one. So, what do we have here? A delayed e4, e5. So we have Scotch from VariantsOnly. So VariantsOnly playing maybe quite a theoretical line here. Queen c4 is the theoretical move. Bishop b4. So I might just turn the opening explorer on here for a second. It is the most common move. But VariantsOnly playing something slightly unusual, going straight for knight at f5. What's the more usual move in the explorer is pawn at d5 apparently. So okay, but this looks very sensible, going straight after g7, castles, and bishop to d3. And now bishop to d3 certainly is quite an unusual move in this position, because the natural thing to do is to go straight for h6. And actually I think, although h6 might be the engine top preference, I think black might be able to get an advantage in this position. So here's how the line goes. h6, d5. So the idea of d5 is if you take it, then we can take here and take here and take here. Yeah, so what the point of d5 is to undermine this knight. Yeah, that's what I should be saying. And if this, then this, and he doesn't have a knight to deliver mate. So d5, if white did do h3, there's d5. Queen takes knight, giving up a knight, which is dangerous because now this is a mate threat. So you quickly take off that knight. Let's win some more material before taking back, and maybe take back with the knight. Bishop takes knight. So here it would be unclear who's winning, except black has a really amazing move here, and that's pawn at b2. So if ever there's a pawn here, you can just take it. The point of pawn at d2 is if you do the natural thing and take, then, pawn at b2, then pawn at d2 is very, very strong. And the point is if you ever take that pawn, this comes. But if you don't take it, well, there's still knight at f4. I'm not sure how this continues, but these sorts of ideas. So, yeah, so pawn at b2 is so the thing to remember in this line is if h3, d5, try and undermine this knight, and eventually you have this pawn at b2 idea, which is very strong. But okay, bishop e3 came, and still d5. And VariantsOnly played quite a strange move here, giving up his queen for the bishop, not for the knight. And the reason is because, well, the bishop and the knight are both deflected from e7. I think I'll turn all these engines and explorers off so we can just look at the really important points in the game. Takes the knight, takes the queen, this is all very natural. Grabs a bishop with check, and then, well, so you have a choice here. Like, you could maybe just take back the queen. But black is kind of going all in here with takes here. So opperwezen goes for knight at c2. But then he realizes maybe this wasn't the best plan because he can't just keep on going all in. And he recognizes, because if you just go all in, knight at h6 comes. If you don't take it, what's the problem? Then the problem is, I'm going to have to get the engine. Knight takes f7. And the knight is pinned, so you can't take it. So king g8, then queen at h8, king takes knight, and then queen takes rook. So this queen is just interfering with the rook's protection of f8. And if king here, then queen here is checkmate. And if king here, then what we hadn't noticed is this bishop is controlling everything. So bishop here is actually checkmate, the power of the two bishops. So if anyone's just joining, I could actually post the study link in the Twitch chat. So yeah. So the reason you can't just go and take this is because after knight at h6 you can't slide into the corner, you do have to take it. But if you take it, then there's something very interesting. Queen at g7 takes, not queen takes knight, bishop takes h6 comes next. And of course you can't take this because otherwise queen takes knight comes. You can block however you like, but then bishop at g5 cuts off this square, he comes here, knight at g7, and he's now only got one square to go to, and finally f3, and that king is mated. So the point is the queen is threatening to come take this and seal that king against the h-file. So he has to come here, takes here with check, g4. Well, the king is basically going to get chased down here, and there is no future. King takes pawn and bishop here checkmate. If he tries running back, we have another pawn in hand to finish things off. Or actually just the existing pawn. Okay, so so he realizes knight at h6 is a problem, and so having gone through this line of knight takes bishop and knight here, he then realizes actually I do need to take the queen. So Opper takes the queen. So now there aren't the same. The knight is defending against a smother threat. And then a really beautiful move here. Queen at g4, and this is really powerful move because it's check, but it's also defending. Queen at f3. Maybe the best thing for white to do is to go for it. King takes c2, takes. Taking back here would be a mistake because if bishop takes again. Discovery. King comes here, drop a bishop here, takes, king here, and knight here is actually checkmate. The queen and the knight working together to cover the light and dark squares. So just to show that again, king takes knight is playable, but if you do take the knight after this move, you have some real problems over this square. You can't just take back because otherwise you can just break. I mean, it takes. The point is if you just run straight, if you don't block and you just run, then there is no hope, because bishop at c2 comes, king a3, pawn at b4, king takes a5. You just build some pawn chains. We have enough pawns here to cover all of these dark squares at a5, king a3 at b4, and if he comes the other way, king c4. Well, the rook is actually cutting off this file, so that would be the reason for trying to not to run immediately but to block, but this doesn't work either because of this discover check. Of course you can block any number of times. I'm going to take any blocker, and you don't want so bishop here check will come at the end, queen takes. You don't want the rook to be here because the same mate comes, bishop here, knight takes, queen takes is checkmate. So bishop here, queen here, and knight here, checkmate. So that's why. So king takes c2 is possible, but then just still pawn takes pawn. But instead, VariantsOnly opted for a queen drop, and d takes e4, and very quickly this game is going in black's favour, with he's just crashing through with d takes e4, taking this pawn, taking on d3, and taking the queen. And VariantsOnly resigned. So that was game one. So are you all hearing me loud and clear? If I can get some feedback in the chat, that would be wonderful. Okay, is it coming through? Okay, so game two of the Crazyhouse World Championship Candidates match. This time Opper is white. And VariantsOnly goes for a gambit line, d4, c5. It is playable. You can take it. If black really wants it back, he can go queen here and pick it back up again. But Opper refuses the gambit. And notice this, there's a hole now on c7. So white should be better with good play. d6, but it's definitely very interesting positions, and VariantsOnly plays nicely. There's a very interesting move here for black, which was missed, and I'm going to just pause a second. So the move that black can actually play here is at h3. And the point is you can't just take it, because otherwise knight takes knight comes. Sure, bishops could be exchanged, but the point is if queen ever takes back this knight, then there's knight here check, picking up the queen. So the point of this at h3 is to deflect one of the two defenders from f3. And it works. So black could go straight in for at h3 here. But okay, instead he went rook b8, takes, and he's realizing there are two attackers on this knight and only one defender, so it's got to do something, like knight, takes, takes, and white is doing very well here. And you might wonder, why can't black just take this? And this is why he can't. Probably best defense would be, yeah, not sure what the best, you can't even do this, because then you just go knight at c7 check, pick up the queen for a knight. So the rook is basically hanging for free. So you can't take this, so instead black goes for some counterattacks, sidesteps with his own counterattack, attacks again, but the counterattack works. Takes, king d7, bishop at c8, very nice move, just keeping the checks. Rook takes c8. Okay, I hadn't planned for this, but I would like to have some little interactive section. So I hadn't planned it for it originally, but let's have some interaction. So that is not quite right. Sorry guys. Okay, so we're trying to work out the move here. Let's just try and get this right. Let's just make sure we got the chat here. We're going to try and get some interaction going. So in Crazyhouse, it's a very good idea to keep the check, because that way you keep on trading off your opponent's pieces in hand and you keep the tempo. So my question to you is, after rook takes bishop, what should white play? And I wonder if there's anyone who's really good in the chat who has an idea for white. And it's totally fine if you don't have an idea, but just wanted to try and get some feedback going. Anyone in the chat? Pawn at e6, says Chuck Moulton. Yes, hello Chuck. See, this is brilliant. It's an intermezzo. You don't take back the rook immediately. You go pawn at e6 first. This is amazing. Because now takes, queen takes, and if you go king takes knight, we're taking that with defended by the queen. It's just so powerful. And probably black's best move is even to go this. Well, we take this anyway. And it's not human beings' first reaction is rook takes bishop, pre-move takes back. But this is brilliant intermezzo. Do this first and then take back. White just cannot lose that game. Whereas as you'll see, what happened in the game was takes back, and VariantsOnly defends nicely here. Queen takes, then pawn at e6. King steps back. Rook at d7. Maybe not the best move, but trying to keep the attack going. Takes, and it looks so dangerous. But actually black is almost okay here. Almost okay, but his queen is under attack, and the best move is simply to take back. And black is basically okay here. unfortunately he did this move here, which is a really nice resource that black has in this position to throw in the check and take that knight, but it's a resource that should have been saved up for later. You can take this pawn and then at some future point throw in a check and take this knight, but by playing this, the problem with this move is that the threat on the queen can't be ignored, so he has to. So now he takes it and he's lost this resource. So that was the problem with this move. He's lost this idea in the position which he had before. So he should have just taken on d7 directly. But now basically white is back in control. Knight here check. Apparently the engine is still seeing knight at e6 apparently was a stronger move for white. The engine is saying, which makes sense, I guess. So knight at e6 takes. I imagine king e8, and it wants to go bishop at c8. Yeah, that does look pretty lethal. But instead, this check, king c8 is the correct move. Knight takes d6, takes back is correct. Bishop at a6. King d8 is not bad. Pawn at b7 is not bad, but yeah, I think so. Black is still black is still doing okay actually here, and pawn at b7. Actually, black is just completely winning with just some simple move like knight at b8, and white has no pieces in hand, can't promote, can't trade things off. Variants only would have been actually winning this game. Just a simple move like knight at b8, maybe even rook at b8. Rook at b8. There are some rook at b8. You have to be a little bit more careful because white can do a castaway check, then get another pawn, then dump that pawn on c7, takes, dump the queen, and then there's a key move for black here. You don't take here because then there's takes back, king b6, and rook at b5 checkmate. So you don't do that, but you simply sidestep this check. And there's no follow-up. So this is why the rook is actually quite risky. The rook is risky because if you just do the knight and this castaway check takes, there isn't. So hang on, what was the line with the rook again? Rook here, castaway, takes a pawn, dumps on c7. So I'm trying to remember why. This line doesn't work the other way around. So takes, bishop takes c6, takes, pawn at c7. So we could go queen takes c7, but apparently we can even just do this. And I'm trying to remember why we can't do that in the other line. Why couldn't we just sidestep here in this other line? Yeah, it's more. We're losing a rook, and apparently it's more risky. But okay, this is not clear. Okay, so maybe it looks quite. Queen takes, king takes, queen here. So again, okay. So for whatever reason, you want to block with something here. So Chuck says, why not rook b1 for a follow-up? Rook b1, king takes bishop. And apparently white has no pieces. White only has a queen and two rooks. So yeah, the problem is that bishop's hanging, whatever the blocker is. So that's why. But yeah. So you don't try and block with anything, you just grab the material, and white has no pieces is the problem. So oh yeah, so there's no queen c4 is the other thing. There's no queen c4, there's no these squares are covered. So somehow survives. But VariantsOnly played too provocatively. He grabbed the queen, and that was the death of black, because white promotes, blocks, takes the knight back, loses his bishop, puts the knight on b7 with check, king e7, black still surviving apparently. Knight d5 check, king back, knight here check. So here black could have just forced white to take the draw just by going up and down. But instead, black was convinced he's winning, and so took this knight, takes back, and unfortunately for variants only, that queen on c7 is quite powerful. So takes, black doesn't quite have anything, despite all the pieces in hand. Check, takes, get a queen on, queen defends. Queen or bishop will defend very nicely, thank you very much. So you don't have any sack on e3. Apparently even bishop at e2 is enough. Queen takes e3, king takes e3. White is still good in this position. But queen is super safe, takes, black has nothing. So a very topsy-turvy game 2. So critical points were in this position, didn't have to take, could have just stepped up and taken the draw. And the other critical point was, for black, was could have just blocked off this promotion, and notice white doesn't have material in hand. So that would have been good. And the other critical point for black is, in this position, just taking on d7 and keeping that resource in the pocket. But you see Opper just keeps on and then the most beautiful is the one which I was giving as the puzzle. Takes, after rook takes bishop, at e6, intermezzo. Okay, so I should take off this, sorry, I should take off the thing covering it up. Okay, so I'll put that back on if I have another puzzle coming up. Okay, so game 3, VariantsOnly was already tilted slightly after that topsy-turvy game, and decides to go for a rover. And I think someone asked in the Discord how many rovers were there after the 10 games, so we'll keep a count. That's one out of 3 so far. And Opper decides to follow suit. So we have facing rook. So we're going to learn about the rover in this game. b3, e5, and we're not going to do some deep opening theory of the rover. We're just going to see both sides are developing, but we're going to just look at some technical points as things go into the middle game. Castles, and maybe a slight error, maybe not, but I'd say it's a slight error is d4, because d4 allows black to take the pawn and attack first. So what maybe white should have done is knight g5. If you're playing against a beginning player, knight g5, you might face h6, which is not a very good move, because then you just very happily take on f7. Again, takes f7 with the king would be a bit of a mistake, because you can throw in a check, grab that rook, and just keep on throwing in some checks. If the king takes here, it's very much out in the open. If it comes back, you're losing the knight. So really attacking the light squares is the idea of this approach. Probably king takes f7 is not the best. Rook takes g3 makes more sense. And weirdly, the best move for white is not taking the queen because of rook takes g2 opening up your king. It's keeping the initiative with knight takes h6 and then grabbing that rook. Grabbing that rook actually with the f pawn to open up this f file. So slight subtle point. This is a slight mistake because, as we'll see in the game, now black gets a pawn and black attacks first. Takes, at g2, takes. And at g4 was played here. Actually, at h3 is even stronger because black has 2 pawns in hand, so he doesn't have to slow play it. He can just go straight in for h3. King takes h3, and then at g4. And then when you king here, pawn takes knight, and it continues. You don't want to go queen takes because of knight here, check, picking up the queen. So you can go very direct with at h3. Instead, at g4 was played. Knight g4 at f3. So white gets what he wants pretty much. But maybe he could have gone a little bit more directly for h3, g2. And actually here, king g1, as we'll see in the game, would have been a little bit better, but for a very subtle reason. King h1 allows knight h5, attacking the rook with check. So this is what happened. Knight takes g6, knight takes. If the king were on g1, this wouldn't be a check. So knight takes g3 with check, and then you take back the knight. And actually about this position, there's a little intermezzo that black could have played first, which is to grab the h-file, grab control of the h-file, and then take back the knight. And the reason why you wouldn't play this is because you'd be worried, but hang on a second, the knight could save itself. Turns out the knight can't save itself because that just brings the queen into the game. So lots of threats here, just taking this with check and so on. And if you take back the bishop, the queen is coming into the game and it's game over. So rook at h6 first, grabbing control of the h-file is a very important theme, as we'll see in this game. The grabbing control of the h-file. Instead he took back with the pawn, and now white grabs the h-file. Black blocks. So black blocks with this knight, and white did this little maneuver, knight to d5, rook here. So now black's got his rook on the h-file, knight here protecting g2. I think white's in some trouble here. And a nice move to try and defend is bishop at d5 to try and keep control, with also attacking ideas of takes, takes, and winning a pawn. But even here, I'm not sure if white's okay. Rook at h5 is the correct response, trying to grab control of the h-file, but also putting pressure on this bishop. Bishop takes here, and if we just take back, then I think white's okay. He just takes on here, takes twice on here, and he's actually got good control of this e4 square, so he has control of this diagonal. Any bishop landing here he can block with the pawn on e4. But probably black's approach here is not to take back at all. That's the problem. Black's best move is to take this with check, drop a pawn on g2, take on h2, take back control of the h-file. Okay, we can block, takes, 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 just sack. Well, okay, so this sort of idea would be, for example, a way of, there doesn't need to be an h7 doesn't work. So this would be a way of black taking control. I mean, you could try blocking on h4, but it doesn't really work because you can take on h4 as well. I think you can take on h4. Apparently that might be stronger. But okay, I feel like black is doing quite well here. But he has to be precise in finding knight takes f2 to really push through this advantage and put the pawn on g2. So bishop at d5 I think would have been a good try. Instead, VariantsOnly goes for this knight maneuver to defend g2. And black grabs a pawn, and as we saw, pawns are going to be lethal on these light squares. Knight takes g2, takes, king takes g2 because he wants to avoid the discovered checks. Because rook takes g2 just walks into a discovery. King g1, probably king takes f2, and then you're picking up the queen. So that's kind of uncomfortable. So king takes makes sense. And here knight f4 was played. So why was this played? Trying to remember. So we only have a knight in hand. So he's trying to cast away the knight and get, so this is very forcing maneuver. To cast away the knight, pick up the rook with check, knight at f3, and it's really very forcing. If you just go here, you're checkmated. So white has to take this knight. Now, having said that, also interesting is knight at f4. Oh yes, I remember why. So the reason why this is so interesting, okay, basically in this position, there's a move black really wants to play, which is bishop f6 and pick up a diagonal, and stick the diagonal on f3 with checkmate. And unfortunately it doesn't work. If you go directly for this, you lose your key, the base of your attack, this key pawn. So the reason why this move is kind of cute is because if you take here, you can simply just go here and try and pick up that bishop. Even a pawn, I think, was going to be lethal because it's just going to be taking here and picking up a queen. So you're picking up a bishop, threatening this mate. So this is a really, really, really nasty attack. And so that, what is the point of knight at f5? The point of knight at f5 is simply to block, to interfere with the queen's attack on this key pawn. So very subtle little point here. Okay, what happened in the game is another idea, which is this, rook takes rook, knight here, and you pick up the queen. Again, taking control of the h-file is a neat little point. If you just take the queen directly, white can try and start a little bit of a counterattack, putting a rook on the h-file. And if you try and put another approach is to throw in a check and then take the queen, and white can't be greedy and go taking that rook, because queen at g2, king here, pawn here, king here, bishop here is checkmate. Very nice. But unfortunately, white can get away by going king takes pawn. A queen is not enough for mate, and black has to try and... Black's kind of short of pieces and has to try and trade to try and find a mate. White king is... So it's unclear whether he's got enough. But, so rook at h3 is actually very interesting, but instead he threw in a check, which is also a very good move, taking control and then taking the queen. So we're threatening mate on g2, so nice play from Opper. Bishop at h3 defends the mate. Bishop takes h4, just going in. So really nice play from black here. Knight at f4. Queen at h6. Probably even better was just to go in. Takes. Put a queen to defend and just take a lot of material. So and use the pawns to do something. So this might have been even more forcing, but queen at h6 is very nice. Knight at g4, attacking the queen. And here, again, I think queen h8 was a slight mistake. He should have just kept on the attack. Even just queen takes knight, because white can't take back, because takes, bishop here, pawn here. If here, pawn here is mate, so you have to take it. With that knight, you actually get a mate. Bring the queen in. Boom. It's checkmate. Yeah, in case I did that too quickly. It's true your queen is under attack, and with check. But black's attack is even more powerful. Take the knight, which is defending h3, then take h3, then go bishop at g2, and the g3 square is weak. That's your entry square. Then you can put a knight on to protecting it, and you're just coming in. So queen h8 was a slight mistake. Actually, white is technically back in control here. And the move is actually knight takes h5, because we're threatening drops on f6 and h7. If you just say queen takes knight, there's nasty rook at h6, and you can't even take it because queen at g7. Just coming back, threatening all kinds of ideas. If you just do something like this, just rook here and queen here mate. So there are these sorts of circle of ideas. Knight takes rook is actually really strong. Knight at h6. So knight at h6, rook at h6, all of these different ideas are in the position. Also another idea in the position is pawn at h7, queen takes, and knight at f6. So there's a whole circle of ideas here. But instead this was played. Rook takes, rook at g3, defending, at g5, knight at d5, trying to defend. Again, at h7 is actually quite interesting here, because if you take with the rook, then this move is actually kind of scary, because you're threatening a smothered mate. If you take this knight, this is a smothered mate. So taking with the rook isn't such a good idea, but taking with the queen is also not such a good idea, because then you're losing the queen. And if you drop a pawn here, we drop a pawn here, and if you drop a pawn here, then we drop a pawn here. So queen takes doesn't look so great. So maybe even after at h7, king takes is necessary. But then black loses the power of his attack. So at h7, interesting move here. but that was missed. Knight d5 was played first at e7. At h6 is a good move from black. Takes. White just goes in, and it turns out, yeah, that was the losing move. Knight takes f4, and black's in some trouble here, but very difficult situation, both sides with 10 to 15 seconds on the clock. But this threat can't be ignored. He just went straight on with the attack instead of defending first. Such a common mistake at all levels, knowing when you need to defend before you can attack. So he just did this, and then this attack is too strong. Takes the bishop, takes again, bishop here, very nice move, trying to bring the queen in, and just defends. Takes, and he's completely safe. At f6, just ignores and goes in. He realizes he's got enough. Throws in a check, takes, bishop here, check, and rook here, checkmate. Actually, so very nice finish from Opper in the end. Actually, instead of rook here, there's actually a way of mating, giving up the rook with knight at h3, king takes rook, and knight here. Simply checkmate in 2. So another comeback win in games 2 and 3. Opper comes back from some difficult positions to take the win. So we go into game 4, and so it's not a rover, so we're 1 out of 4 rover openings, and this bishop is being pushed back, goes all the way back to f2. e3 is slightly weak in the position, so that's why he goes to f2 rather than g3, and it leaves the square g3 for the knight. h4 was played, and black took. Maybe there's a case for just doing this. Takes. Seems maybe about equal. But okay, takes is interesting. Takes. But then what? So both sides have a pawn in hand. If I were black, I'd be tempted to put the pawn back here, but is there anything more interesting we can do with that pawn? Well, VariantsOnly had an idea, but Opper had a brilliant refutation. And I'm just going to show it. It's just really nice. Just gives up that knight for a pawn, and all the pieces are flowing out. And the point is he wants to take this bishop next and open up a hole on f7. And he's just chasing that bishop away from a defensive g6. If you just back off, that doesn't work. I mean, pawn at e6 straight away actually is a problem. If queen d7 takes, push here was also an idea. Oof, with e6 being a real weakness. So, and if you go all the way back to d8, just simply takes, and the same idea would probably be good. I was thinking this. It's good for white. Apparently bishop at e6 is even more forcing, just blocking this pawn. So really difficult position. Notice this looks like you're giving up a whole piece for a pawn, but look at it. All the white pieces just streaming into the position, and this is what happened in the game. At d2, simply takes it. You just check, are there any knight checks? Nope, no knight checks. So the king is safe, simply blocks. And he's got an eye on this, as we'll see. Comes crashing into those light squares, and we're going to see a resignation very soon, if not a mate. Black resigns, because pawn here mate is coming next. So very strong game 4 from Opper. No messing around that game. Maybe one mistake from VariantsOnly, and then it was all over. Okay, so another d4, d5 game. This time Opper showing how it should be played as black. Knight takes g5, very aggressive. So this is interesting, because he takes and then plays h4, and that kind of raises a question. Whenever you take a piece, you're thinking, what do I need that piece for? Why did I take that pawn? What do I need it for? And if you're just going to take and then just push a pawn, not use that pawn, it does raise the question, why not just play h4 directly? And there is a possible reason why you wouldn't play h4 directly, and that's because what if black then just goes g4? And white might then put his knight on e5. And you have to ask yourself, is that a better position or a worse position than taking on g5 directly? So I'm not sure what the answer is to this, but it's the kind of thing you have to think about. If we're looking at the engine at depth 20, it says black's got a slight edge, but if takes here, it's thinking black has got actually a bigger edge. So maybe that would have been a better approach, to go h4 first. But okay, h4 was played now, takes, and now g4 comes in, and h5. Well, it's certainly an interesting position, that h-pawn running up the board. Bishop at h6, so white is playing along the light squares in this position. Takes at h3, so a nice move to block off this h-file. So takes, knight at f3 check, king f1, and here Opper, I think, with a very strong move. So somehow Opper's lost some of his advantage. No, I guess the engine is sort of unclear. So I think it's a very strong move. Takes h3. Okay, the engine is not really agreeing. The point is, if you take this knight, we're then going to go at g2, and if you sidestep, then takes here, rook takes, and bishop g4. Okay, so this feels like it's crushing for black, but the engine thinks just give up the queen and it's not so bad after all. So this is surprising, to say the least. And it turns out actually there's an even better move for white, which is simply give up the queen and say, at the end of all that, black only has a queen in hand and can't do anything. So anyway, very confusing. I find it hard to believe. Yeah, lots. I think takes h3 is a good move, but the engine is fearless. The engine is completely fearless. Just says take this knight, and take this knight, and queen takes g2 seems fine. Even king e2 might be playable. So, wow. Okay. Even king e1 might be playable. Okay, this I didn't realize at all. Okay, so I'm finding that really surprising, but I think it's a good move, because it clearly, VariantsOnly was not going to take that knight, instead went for his counterattack, and black is completely crushing. At g2, knight takes pawn, and this is just totally crushing, and at f3, and white resigned. So the point is, if you ever step back to the back rank, you're losing the rook with check and getting a queen on the back rank. And if you ever take here, bishop here is coming with checkmate. And in the meantime, that bishop is just a monster. So yeah, so takes here. I feel like it was a good move, but apparently there are resources after queen takes knight. But just going for a counterattack allows Opper to get everything he wanted, and there's this mate with the two bishops lurking. So at the end of that game, Opper was up 5-0. 5-0 at the halfway point of this match. Okay, game 6. We're going to see a very theoretical line from Opper here with f3. So the point is, you just grab the center, and obviously you wouldn't want to play this in Bughouse because your opponent might get a pawn for f2, but in Crazyhouse, not so easy to get that pawn. And there's a very interesting move here from black, which was first trialed, I think, in the Crazyhouse League. So a slow Crazyhouse match between Rapid Variants as black and JK the Bullfrog, if I remember rightly. So I think Rapid Variant, I can't seem to find the games, but and I don't think it worked in that particular game, but Rapid Variants did win some other games in shorter time controls. And the move is this, knight to c4, and the idea is simply just get a pawn for that. So give up the knight for free, but you wreck white's pawn structure, and you get a pawn back at some point. Oh yeah, you get a pawn for that knight. So if you takes here, and you try and get that pawn on f2 at some point. And Opper declines the gambit. We see a pattern there, declining VariantsOnly's gambits. Seems a strange move because it's allowing the knight back to here, but actually it's not because the knight's guarding here. So probably in this position, bishop e3 is logical because you're guarding that weak square. d5 makes a lot of sense, and then knight h3 again. You might ask, why not play knight h3 first? And the problem is this looks rather uncomfortable. And taking on d4 next. So that's why you want to play bishop e3 first, guarding f2, reinforcing d4, and then knight h3. I think this is the solid way of playing it. But okay, f4 was played instead, d5, knight f3, and the knight comes in to e4. And actually, I'm feeling like black's doing okay in this position. Knight d4, queen d3, bishop d7, rook b1, rook b8, h5, knight g5. So hard to say who's better in this whole sequence. But okay, here white's winning a pawn, but black's trying to get some counterplay on the king. Takes. Unfortunately for him, white has his own ideas of how to use that pawn, with a pawn on g6. And this seems to be quite a powerful attack. Knight at g3. It's a very creative move. Hitting the queen, and when you take it, rook takes rook. King d2. So white is still doing fine. An interesting idea here is, what if black went pawn at a2? And I think even in that position, you can just grab the queen. The engine doesn't like it, but I think it works. Just takes back. Let's see, what does it work again? Let me remember. Takes, throw in a check, throw in another check, put a queen on the back rank. Yeah, white has a mate here. That's what it is. Sack your queen for a knight and just go all in. And you do have a mate apparently. So it's a very long mating sequence. It's like a mate in 17 at some point. So it's all checks. But okay, it's pretty hard to see hard to see these sorts of things. So the point is to say black's position is pretty lethal. In fact, in the end, black goes for rook takes c1, rook takes, bishop takes pawn, rook h1, add f2. Okay, now he takes the queen, and he's safe. And probably the neat way of finishing it here is draw the king to f8, because now we get, so it's like a magnet drawing him to f8, and now we can get him with check. And this is a beautiful checkmate with the queen and two knights. But what happened in the game was instead this. Similar idea, if king takes queen, you can have rook at h8 checkmate, so you have to have king here, and bishop here, and it's checkmate. Okay, so Opper takes a 6-love lead after 6 games. Okay, but VariantsOnly would fight back with the rover, the second rover out of 7 games. And again, we have a face-off. But you'll see that VariantsOnly plays this time a lot better than the previous time. So he takes on g6, he takes on f7, and on the face of it, black is actually doing fine here, because black is up a piece for a pawn, and the king is actually quite safe on f8. Okay, d4, very aggressive. So yeah, black seems to be doing fine. Rook at a1 is a sneaky little move. You can't take it because of this, picking up the queen. So instead, white takes the knight, black takes the queen, and as I said, black is doing incredibly well here. So how does black go on to lose this? Bishop takes rook, staying very safe. Queen at g4 check, d6, just developing the bishop. Okay, the queen is finding itself in a little bit of trouble there. Rook at e1 check is a nice deflection move to take that rook, which is giving trouble. Actually, there's a neat move here, which is queen takes rook, and the point is, if you take with the rook, there's rook at e2. Then take the rook back. Then put the rook on the back rank, and then the pawn drop. So Juan Cruz Arias TDF says, hi, how will VariantsOnly do against Katask if they play Crazyhouse in the multi-variant championship? In Crazyhouse, so Katask is just a favourite in every single game he plays against pretty much anyone apart from Jasugi99, it looks like, at the moment. But we'll see. He gets to play Opper shortly. I'm not sure how shortly. So Queen takes Rook is interesting. Queen takes Rook is really interesting. If Knight takes Rook, by the way, the problem with that is takes, and yeah, the problem with the Knight is you allow a pawn here. Ouch. So that's painful for White. But the problem is if you take with the Rook, if you take with the Rook, there's this sequence. Check, driving the king here. Oh yeah, so just to say, you can't come here because this is checkmate. Because of this bishop. So you're driven to the back rank, and then you take the Rook, and Rook on the back rank, and this is trouble, and very hard to stop. So Queen takes Rook was interesting, but hard to spot. So Rook takes instead was played, and still Black should be doing okay here, but he's had to give up the Queen. So White is fighting back. And here maybe I think Black goes for the wrong plan. Black goes for the plan of take something, promote. It's a little bit slow. Bishop at g5 is good. Interesting here, I was thinking, why doesn't White just put a Rook on the back rank? And there's a really good reason why White doesn't do that, to stop the Queen. Because Black would just do this, Rook takes pawn, and Black's got a wonderful Rook on the first rank, and White's got a terrible Rook stuck on a2. So it's a kind of neat idea. It's very difficult for White to do anything. If he puts any piece on a1, Rook at b1. So actually the right approach is exactly what VariantsOnly did, of counterattacking. Promotes, okay, sure, it looks threatening, at h6. And this comes down to, as a philosophical question actually I was asking on Discord. Which is more valuable, the queen, your original queen, or the promoted queen? Because it's a little bit of a paradox, because on the one hand they should be equally valuable. After all, they're both queens and they both have the same power. On the other hand, if you lose this queen, your opponent gets a queen in their hand. So in that sense, this queen is a lot more valuable because the cost of losing it would give your opponent a queen. And then that goes against our intuition of loyalty. Because if we look at this position, we see two queens, and we see one queen which, if it's lost in battle, will flip colours and become a white queen. So we can say this is not the loyal queen. And this queen, who's a loyal queen, that when he's lost in battle, he'll become a pawn for the opponent. So it goes against our intuition that loyalty is valuable. Because here, as we said, this is actually the much more valuable queen. Because we don't want to lose it, because it will flip sides. But this is the more loyal queen. The promoted queen is the more loyal queen. So, in practice, what this means in Crazyhouse is actually loyalty is not rewarded. And the best thing to do with the promoted queen is often just to sack it for a piece, because we actually get two pieces. The piece in our hand and the piece taken away from the opponent. And the opponent just gets a pawn. So we lose a queen on the board, we lose a pawn in the opponent's hand, but what we gain is two pieces, one less from our opponent and one more in our pocket. So it's actually a good idea often to sack promoted pieces. So for example, knight here check. What's the idea of this? The idea is if he takes, he doesn't want to take. So instead he moves. And here apparently just queen takes d1 is strong. And the reason is if you take here, takes here, and that opens up this square for a continued attack. But instead this was played, and that's a really bad move because it opens up the g7 square. And VariantsOnly, really sharp on the tactics, spots it immediately. Rook at g7. And the problem with this is if you ever take this rook, this is checkmating you. Takes, 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 pawn here, queen here, rook here, checkmate. So suddenly Opper is in huge difficulty. He can't take that rook. He has to sidestep. Bishop takes h6 comes anyway. Okay, now he takes, but it's too late because there's no direct mate threat for black. So he's taking here, but already white has a direct mate. The double check, so it can't be taken. I mean, you don't want to take it because queen here is checkmate, but you can't block is what I meant. So king here, queen here check, just to win the queen with check, bishop takes, knight takes pawn. This is sort of unnecessary. So here there's a very beautiful mate. At c6 to block off the king, and queen here checkmate. And because the king can't run here or here, it's called a swallowtail mate. And of course, if the king takes here, then the queen lands here, and the king can't run here or here, and this is called a dovetail mate. So that was the beautiful move, at c6. And if you try and run here, there's still the swallowtail mate, because these two squares are covered. So instead, VariantsOnly just picks up a bit more extra material just to make sure. Okay, so he has at least a draw, just oscillating, going up and down. But he also has a pawn in hand, so he drops the pawn just to block off this square and then get the swallowtail mate. So that's a nice way of finishing it as well. Although just pawn at c6 in this position was sufficient, he did this instead. A little bit harder work, but same result. So VariantsOnly gets onto the scoreboard, and it's now 6 games to 1 after two games of rover. So 3 games to go. What are we going to get? A rover from both. A delayed rover from white, and so we've got the 3rd rover of the 10 games in game 8. And which way is this one going to go? So rook at g4 hitting g2. Queen comes in defending. d5. Well, you have to develop the pieces after all. Bishop b5, bishop d7. Bishop takes c6. And here, black missed a bit of a trick. This rook is not actually very well positioned. It's blocking the e-pawn. This is a wonderful move because you're both threatening this, and you get to push the e-pawn and develop your bishop. So black is doing fine here. Unfortunately, he played bishop takes, which is not nearly as good. That rook is a bit awkward. Little neat little trick though here. Very neat little trick. But a neat counter trick. So we're not picking up the knight because of rook at g3. Very nice. So rook takes pawn and knight takes f7. This is a really powerful sack from white. Just very uncomfortable to defend because he hasn't developed this c8 bishops. It's just really uncomfortable. But apparently he should be doing fine with good play. Bishop takes, pawn takes, knight at g6. d4. Yeah, awkward position. Probably rook h5 is good, just threatening rook at h1. At e6 is interesting because if the king steps back, then bishop to f7 is mate, so it forces king takes, and then you have a check picking up the rook. But fortunately for black, you could just dump a knight here, and if you were to dare to take the rook, there's simply knight takes g3, hitting the queen and also threatening rook at h1. So this is a kind of uncomfortable position. Rook at h1, king here, knight takes rook. Actually, this king is... Then white doesn't have the diagonals to make this king. So rook h5 would have been better. You'll see why this was not so good. Rook e4 just walks into, the rook was protecting the g5 square, and now there's just a check. Check again. He doesn't have bishop e6 check, so he grabs the rook first and then brings the queen in, and oof, VariantsOnly kind of walked into a mate here. So yeah, very difficult position. He hadn't pushed his e-pawn. He was still fine, but had to tread extremely carefully, and probably had to keep the rook on this 5th rank, guarding everything. So after, I think that's 3 rovers after 8 games? I've lost count. That was also a rover. Why? Okay, so game 3 was a rover. Game 4 was not. Game 5 was not. Game 6 was not. So game 7 was the 2nd rover, and game 8 was the 3rd rover. Okay, so after 3 rovers, VariantsOnly is down 7-1 after 8 games. And we're going to have a 4th rover in game 9. And again, Opper is not going for central control. He's going for the mirror tactic, mirroring White's play, except this time not mirroring. He goes for the h-pawn push. And he grabs the center with his rook. So that looks promising for Black. Looks like he should have an edge. But also looks like White's getting a queen, and pretty hard to stop. If you don't move the knight, this is a queen. If you move the knight, this is a queen. So worrying times for Black. Knight at b6, trying desperately to get the queen back. But as I said, this promoted queen can sack for a piece, and it's a good exchange. You get 2 bishops for a pawn, effect for a queen and a pawn. So it's a good trade. Bishop at b5, g6. Do I have any analysis on this game? I do, but it's a lot later on. Bishop g7, and White just grabs a knight with his rook. Why does he want a knight? He wants to put the knight here. Okay. Grabs the rook, hits the queen. So who's winning this one? Rook takes rook, check, takes back, bishop takes bishop. Okay, I need to just back up a second. There are so many threats going on. So knight here attacking the queen, pawn takes knight. So the natural thing to do here would just be to take back. But instead, rook here check, and now he can't take this because why not? Why couldn't he just take this? He could have taken this. Queen takes d5 would have been sensible. So instead he goes for a very aggressive takes and takes and takes. But he allows pawn takes or bishop takes here. Takes, takes, rook on the back rank, defends. Oh, that's a nice one. So picking up that bishop, so not clear. Bishop here regaining control of the diagonal. Okay, so this is going... He doesn't want to take this pawn, obviously, because otherwise bishop lands here. That's very bad for Black. So maybe Black's surviving, but his king has got to run away by hand, as it were. Knight at g5, queen takes b2. Okay, so he grabs the rook, knight d6. Okay, so it looks like White is crushing here. King g8 takes the rook. So Black's just going for some desperate defense, trying to get take on g2. Bishop at f3 seems to defend. Oh. So this game I clearly haven't analysed as carefully as I'd have liked. Apparently castles is safe here for Black. Bishop f3 runs into difficulties because of knight takes d3, and you can't take back because queen can take the knight, and we have enough to get the mate. Takes, takes, queen here, knight here, pawn here is checkmate. That's a nice little pattern, by the way. The queen, the knight, and the pawn. So knight takes d3. You can't take it back, which means, and you can't run here because queen here is checkmate. So you have to run up. Okay, and then what? The queen could come back, pawn at e3, and then you could grab this knight. Okay, and apparently this is slightly better for black, but it's very confusing. Knight at c1, king to f1, knight takes d3. Now we have to suddenly guard this somehow. Okay, I'm not sure how we're going to continue. Not sure how this is going to continue, but apparently this might be okay for black. So instead, what happened was queen here, and now white castles as he should, and the white attack continues. White is safe, and white continues his attack and throws away the knight, gets a pawn on f7, puts rook on g8. Got to be careful with that there isn't some nasty mate here. What's the nasty mate? I'm trying to figure it out. Like, if white does nothing, what's the idea? The idea is queen takes d1. Queen takes d1, and you can't take back because of knight at e2. Check. Takes. This is the kind of idea in the air. So white has to be a little bit careful. But yeah, taking this knight regains control of this square. You can throw this check, just sidestep, knight at f2, just take it. Okay, but now we have enough for this mate. Well, this is all played under very low time. But really perfect play from VariantsOnly in low time. Really brilliant play. Throws in a check, threatening to take the queen, and threatening to take the queen with check. He's forced to this square. So he takes the queen with check, and it's all over. So I have to say, really, really nice play in time pressure from VariantsOnly, converting a winning position. It seems like Stockfish has a tiny thing here saying that when he castled, when he played bishop f3, he should have castled directly. And black doesn't have enough to attack. But by playing bishop f3, there were some really weird tactics with this and this. So yeah, that was something that was missed. So that's 7 games to 2 after 4 rovers out of 9 games. And are we going to get another rover in the final game? We are. So 5 out of 10 rovers is the answer to the question in Discord. That's how many rovers we're going to get. And it's going to be a symmetrical rover, both lifting the rooks to e3 and e6. And who's going to win the final battle of the rovers? So here, the principled approach is to play d5, I would say. Because takes, check, rook here, get out the way, knight here, go back, and d4. And we return to an almost normal position where maybe white has a slight advantage. But instead what was played is b6, trying to develop the bishop along this diagonal, and maybe that's not quite as good, because white gets d4 in, grabs the center, and very soon we'll see, well, in this particular position, black is already struggling. King takes f7, grabs the knight, sticks the knight on g5. This is all over. King g6. Opper is ruthless here. If you take the knight, the problem is there's a double check, bishop and rook. What do? If you go here, queen here is checkmate. If you didn't take, yeah, so there's nothing up. Queen here is checkmate if you go the other way as well. So you instead, king h6 happened, and well, that's knight f7 checkmate. That's no good. What else could have happened? King f5 was the other move, but then rook f3 check, threatening to take anything. Bishop takes rook, queen takes, block, and queen takes would be checkmate. So, and if king here, then there's a double check, king f5, queen g4 checkmate. But okay, VariantsOnly saw the writing was on the wall, so he let Opper take the pretty mate with the knight, and the queen protects this pawn. So 5 games out of 10 were rovers, and Opper took the series 8 games to 2. Yeah, thanks for watching. I think the other thing I've been doing on my YouTube lately are mating motifs from the Crazyhouse World Championship game. So some nice puzzle positions. So if there are any from this sequence, I might go back and add that to my mating motifs study. But okay, have a good Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, depending on where you are, and have a good rest of the week. Bye, guys.